Welcome, everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here for this explainer. Today, we're dissecting the structural realities of operational friction. We're going to look way past those surface-level symptoms that constantly frustrate leadership teams, and instead, we're digging right into the architectural constraints that secretly govern how work actually flows, or doesn't flow, through an organization. So, let's kick things off with a question that trips up countless organizations. Why does purchasing top-tier software usually result in faster operational chaos? If you've ever lived through a massive software rollout, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Well, we are completely bypassing the generic corporate platitudes today to uncover the structural truth behind this. The answer actually doesn't lie in the software's features at all. It's all about how the organization receives it.
Okay, let's really dive into this. There is a stark contrast between conventional wisdom and structural reality here. When workflows break down, the conventional instinct is almost always to reorganize the department, shift around some reporting lines, and basically assign blame. But the actual physical reality of how work flows through an organization demands the exact opposite approach. You absolutely must diagnose which specific workflows are constraining throughput before you even think about restructuring. Calm, clear diagnosis is always more effective than reactive reorganization. Now, this misdiagnosis is what we call the bottleneck illusion. When highly capable people suddenly look unreliable, it's almost never a sudden drop in talent. People don't just forget how to work overnight. It is almost always a process gap that's compounding under organizational growth. The friction gets misidentified as a talent gap, but the true causal mechanism is structural misalignment. The work is stalling precisely across the boundaries where departments meet, and those individuals are simply taking the blame for a fundamentally broken system. So when leadership misdiagnoses that bottleneck, they usually fall right into our first major failure mode, improvement theater. I really want you to remember this term so you can spot it in the wild, or, in your next management meeting. Improvement theater happens when an organization applies localized point fixes to a fundamentally misaligned operating model. These local workarounds completely fail to fix the global constraint. Instead, they just relocate the friction to a different department. Let's walk through the exact causal mechanism of why improvement theater fails. First, you launch an isolated process fix. Second, you observe a brief performance lift, and hey, everyone celebrates. But then step 3 happens, and this is the critical point of failure. The surrounding elements of the operating model, particularly the unaligned incentives, pull human behavior backward. And finally, step 4, you see a complete reversion to the old equilibrium. The failure occurs simply because the surrounding environment was never redesigned to support the new behavior. And the crucial takeaway here is that engaging in improvement theater isn't just harmless busy work. It actively damages the organization. Fake transformation is incredibly expensive in terms of human attention and morale. Every single time you run a theatrical improvement cycle that ultimately reverts, you're spending the organization's trust. You're ensuring that when you finally attempt a real transformation, absolutely nobody is going to believe you. Which leads us directly to our second major failure mode, announce and abandon. This is the fatal assumption that a single moment of communication, like say a big all-hands meeting or a company-wide memo, can carry the heavy weight of actual behavioral change. Change initiatives die quietly when leadership mistakes the mere announcement of a new process for the actual adoption of that process. To actually counter that, you have to build tangible adoption infrastructure. You don't just ask for goodwill, you build a system. This means creating a stakeholder map to assign explicit relationship owners. It means establishing a role-specific communication cadence so people hear how the change affects them directly from the manager they trust. It requires explicitly defined paths for handling resistance. And finally, usage dashboards to measure genuine adoption rather than just, basic compliance. And speaking of resistance, there's a completely counterintuitive truth you need to understand here. Most leaders view resistance as disloyalty or a bad attitude. But structurally, resistance is incredibly valuable diagnostic data. It's pure information about unaddressed operational risk, hidden workloads, or perceived loss. If you actually listen to resistance rather than trying to crush it, you accelerate adoption because you surface and solve the exact operational risks that would have derailed you later on. Let's see how this builds into our third failure mode, which perfectly answers that opening hook we talked about regarding operational chaos. Tool-first transformation is the error of treating a software purchase as the transformation itself. Technology simply cannot manufacture human desire, and it cannot supply reinforcement. If you buy software without governing the human process change that the technology demands,
You are literally just buying chaos.
I absolutely love this insight, and it brilliantly illustrates the point. A company that automates a broken workflow gets a faster broken workflow. Buying software before designing your process architecture is a massive structural error. The platform can only automate the design it's given. So if your underlying workflows are a mess, top-tier software is just going to execute that mess with terrifying efficiency.
Here's the exact cascade of failure when that happens. Step 1, you purchase the software without human governance. Step 2, your legacy systems instantly clash with the new workflows because they simply don't share the same data architecture. Step 3, integration debt accumulates silently across the organization as people frantically build manual workarounds. And step 4, the workforce completely abandons the expensive new tool. This happens because a software platform cannot govern itself.
The structural countermeasure to this software trap is what we call the transformation governance stack. To make any tool actually land, you need 3 elements acting together. First, an accountable executive sponsor who clears the obstacles out of the way. Second, a lightweight program office cadence to coordinate all the moving pieces. And third, published leading indicators of usage, so adoption becomes a visible fact rather than just a feeling. If you remove any one of these layers, the other 2 will absolutely decay.
So, knowing all this, it leads us to a highly practical question. When you face operational friction, how do you decisively choose between dramatic reinvention, like a full transformation, and disciplined, targeted improvement? You need concrete rules for this, not guesswork. So, here are your airtight conditional decision rules to diagnose your specific constraint. If the performance gap is isolated to a single observable condition or market event, do targeted improvement. However, if the root causes span across structure, process, and incentives simultaneously, you must do a transformation. And critically, if fixing one single element is instantly undone by the surrounding elements pulling it back, do a transformation. Let the evidence dictate the scope.
Now, if the evidence points to transformation, you are essentially redesigning the operating model. The operating model is the aligned set of repeatable choices about how work gets organized, governed, and rewarded. The key word here is aligned. Your structure, your core processes, your decision rights, and your incentives cannot operate as isolated silos. They absolutely must act together as one fully coherent system. To achieve that alignment, there is a precise, non-negotiable sequence you have to follow. First, structure determines the reporting lines. Second, process redesigns how work flows through that structure. Third, decision rights codify who has the authority to act. And fourth, incentives align the rewards to the new behavior. The causal mechanism here is that each layer strictly constrains the next layer. Notice how this sequence completely contradicts conventional corporate advice. The standard urge is to run transformation elements concurrently to save time. But structurally, that is a disaster. If you run out of sequence, say defining decision rights before you finalize the structure, you are attaching authority to organizational boxes that are about to move. Running out of sequence literally forces you to pay for the exact same redesign work twice because the foundation just keeps shifting.
And we really must pay special attention to the very end of that sequence. Incentives. Incentives require continuous governance because of a very specific causal mechanism. They are the absolute slowest element of your model to change, but they are the fastest to undermine everything else. If you leave old incentives unchecked, they will systematically destroy your elegant new operational model because people will always default to what they are actually rewarded for doing.
Ultimately, this all boils down to a core philosophy. Systems that stay coherent stay calm, and calm systems compound. Transformation is simply the practice of restoring agreement between what a company intends to do and how it actually operates on a daily basis. Continuous, disciplined realignments prevent the accumulation of massive crises, allowing your organization to scale with absolute calm.
I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to take back to your own teams. Look closely at your internal structures and ask yourself, is your growth truly constrained by ordinary talent, or is it constrained by an operating model that flat out refuses to let ordinary talent produce reliable output? I really hope this explainer has given you the structural lens to find out. Keep learning, keep analyzing, and I will see you next time.